6 things God shows you when you've met your soulmate. Let me say this gently, because this topic touches the heart more than the mind. Meeting your soulmate is not always loud, dramatic, or obvious. It doesn't always come with instant certainty or perfect timing. Sometimes it comes quietly, sometimes it comes unexpectedly, and sometimes it challenges you far more than it comforts you at first. Many people are searching for a sign, a feeling, or a moment that proves this is the one. But God rarely confirms soulmates the way movies or culture suggest. He doesn't rely on emotional highs alone. He doesn't rush the process, and he doesn't separate love from growth. When God brings a soulmate into your life, he doesn't just show you the person. You begin to see life, love, and yourself differently. A soulmate connection from God doesn't exist just to make you happy. It exists to make you whole. It reveals areas that need healing, patterns that need breaking, and faith that needs strengthening. It doesn't replace God in your life. It pushes you closer to Him. And that's how you know it's different. You may feel deeply seen, yet deeply challenged, drawn in, yet invited to grow, safe, yet stretched. That tension isn't confusion, it's transformation. God uses soulmate relationships as mirrors and instruments, shaping both hearts so they can walk together with maturity, purpose, and peace. This is why the real confirmation doesn't come only through emotion. It comes through revelation. God starts showing you things you never noticed before, about yourself, about love, about timing, about purpose, and about what truly matters. These revelations don't overwhelm you, they anchor you. They don't create chaos, they bring clarity. So if you've ever wondered whether a connection is truly from God, don't just ask how it feels, ask what God is showing you through it. Because when you've met your soulmate, God always reveals more than romance. He reveals truth. Part 1. God shows you who you really are beneath the surface. One of the first and deepest things God does when you meet your soulmate is something most people don't expect. Before He shows you how much this person can love you, He shows you how much truth you can handle. This kind of connection doesn't just make you feel chosen, it makes you feel seen. And being truly seen is beautiful, but it is also confronting. You begin to notice parts of yourself that were easy to ignore when you were alone. Patterns you learned to survive with, emotional habits that once protected you, reactions you justified because no one ever stayed close enough to challenge them. When God brings your soulmate into your life, those patterns don't disappear, they surface. You may notice how quickly you assume rejection, how deeply you fear being misunderstood, how easily you shut down when you feel exposed, or how you overgive, over-explain, or over-control when you're afraid of losing connection. These things were always there, but love has a way of shining light into places independence kept dim. This can feel unsettling at first. You might wonder why a relationship that feels so right is also stirring things you thought were healed. But this is where God's intention becomes clear. He is not trying to destabilize you. He is trying to free you. God doesn't bring a soulmate into your life to cover wounds. He brings them to help heal them. And what makes this different from unhealthy exposure is the presence of grace. You don't feel condemned for what's revealed. You feel invited to grow. Conviction replaces shame. Awareness replaces denial. Instead of feeling like you have to defend yourself, you feel motivated to become healthier. God begins teaching you responsibility, not in a heavy way, but in an empowering one. You stop blaming your past for your present reactions. You stop spiritualizing avoidance. You stop calling fear wisdom or emotional distance discernment. You start owning your responses, your triggers, and your growth. What's important is that this growth doesn't come from pressure. A soulmate connection from God doesn't demand that you change to be loved. It inspires you to change because you are loved. You want to communicate better. You want to pray more honestly. You want to heal deeply, not superficially. God also shows you the difference between vulnerability and weakness. You begin to open up without fear of being used. You begin to share without oversharing. You learn how to be honest without being reactive. These are skills God develops through safe connection. You may also notice that your relationship with God deepens during this time, not because the person replaces God, but because the connection highlights your dependence on Him. You pray differently. You listen more carefully. You become more aware of your need for God's guidance, not just in the relationship but in your own heart. This is one of the clearest signs that you've met your soulmate. The relationship doesn't inflate your ego. It refines your character. It doesn't distract you from inner work. It draws you into it. You don't feel like you're losing yourself. You feel like you're becoming more whole. God shows you who you really are, not to overwhelm you, but to prepare you. Because the kind of love He is building requires truth, maturity, and healing, not performance. Part 2. God shows you a higher, healthier definition of love. When you've met your soulmate, God begins to dismantle your old definitions of love, not all at once, and not harshly, but clearly. You start realizing that much of what you once called love was actually attachment, fear, chemistry, or emotional dependency. This love feels different. It doesn't rush you. It doesn't confuse you. It doesn't keep you in constant emotional tension. Instead, there is stability. Even when things are uncertain, there is peace underneath. Even when emotions fluctuate, there is commitment beneath them. God shows you that real love is not fueled by emotional highs. It is sustained by intentional choices. You begin to notice how safe this love feels. Safe to speak honestly, safe to say no, safe to grow at a healthy pace. You don't feel like you have to earn affection or compete for attention. You're not constantly wondering where you stand. Clarity replaces anxiety. God shows you that love from Him does not pull you away from your convictions. It doesn't weaken your boundaries, it strengthens them. You don't feel pressured to compromise spiritually, emotionally, or morally to keep the connection. In fact, obedience becomes easier, not harder. You find yourself wanting to honor God more because of this relationship, not less. Wanting to be disciplined, faithful, and intentional, not out of fear, but out of alignment. Love becomes a place where faith is reinforced, not tested. God also teaches you that love is revealed over time, not proven in intensity. You start valuing consistency over charm, character over charisma, fruit over promises. You pay attention to how this person handles stress, conflict, disappointment, and responsibility. And instead of overlooking warning signs because of attraction, you feel clarity instead of confusion. This love doesn't rely on emotional manipulation or uncertainty to stay exciting. It grows deeper through trust, honesty, and shared direction. You're not addicted to reassurance because reassurance isn't constantly being threatened. God shows you that love is not about losing your individuality. You don't shrink in this relationship. You expand. Your voice matters. Your pace matters. Your calling matters. You don't feel absorbed or overshadowed. You feel supported. This kind of love respects process. Even when feelings are strong, there is patience. Even when desire is present, there is wisdom. You both understand that rushing intimacy can sabotage depth and that what God is building is worth protecting. God begins shifting your questions. You stop asking only, "Do I feel in love?" and start asking, "Is this producing fruit?" You stop focusing only on compatibility and start paying attention to spiritual alignment. You ask whether this connection produces peace, growth, accountability, and obedience. This doesn't mean the relationship is perfect. There are still disagreements, still misunderstandings, still moments of tension. But the difference is how those moments are handled. There is humility instead of pride, responsibility instead of blame, conversation instead of avoidance. God shows you that love is not the absence of conflict. It is the commitment to grow through it with honesty and grace. And slowly, you realize that this love is not consuming your life. It is stabilizing it. It is not replacing God. It is reflecting Him. It is not distracting you from purpose. It is aligning you with it. That's when you begin to understand something profound. God is not just showing you who your soulmate is. He is showing you what love was always meant to be. Part 3. God shows you the importance of timing, patience, and trusting His process. One of the clearest and most humbling lessons God begins to teach when you've truly met your soulmate is that love does not give you permission to rush what He is carefully building. In fact, the deeper the connection, the more intentional the pace often becomes. This can feel surprising, especially if you expected certainty to remove waiting. But God does something wiser. He uses the connection to teach you trust. When a relationship is driven by fear, it demands speed. It needs constant reassurance. It pushes for labels, promises, and outcomes before roots have time to grow. But when a relationship is from God, there is an underlying confidence that does not panic when things take time. Even when desire is strong, wisdom remains stronger. God begins showing you that timing is not a barrier to love, it is a protector of it. You may notice that instead of forcing conversations or outcomes, you're learning to release control. You stop trying to secure the relationship. You stop testing it through pressure. You stop interpreting every pause as a threat. Instead, you begin to rest. Sometimes for the first time in a romantic connection. This is not because you care less. It's because you trust more. God shows you how much damage impatience caused in the past, how rushing intimacy created attachment before discernment, how forcing clarity led to compromise, and instead of condemning you for it, He gives you wisdom now. You begin to understand that what you once called passion was often anxiety, and what you once called urgency was often fear of loss. In a God-led soulmate connection, patience becomes mutual. One person is not dragging the other forward, and one is not emotionally withholding to gain control. There is a shared understanding that love does not expire if it is not rushed. You may not always understand the pace, but you respect it because peace remains present. God also begins teaching you that waiting exposes motives. It reveals whether you are pursuing the person for fulfillment or trusting God for formation. Waiting strips away fantasy and forces you to engage reality. It shows you whether love is rooted in obedience or impulse. And here's something important. Patience does not mean passivity. You're still intentional. You still communicate. You still grow. But you stop trying to manipulate outcomes. You allow God to shape both hearts fully before asking them to carry something heavy together. God uses timing to mature trust. You learn that silence does not equal absence, that unanswered questions do not equal rejection, that uncertainty does not equal danger. You become comfortable not knowing everything yet, and that comfort is not apathy, it is faith. When you've met your soulmate, God often teaches you to trust Him with the relationship before you ever fully trust the relationship itself, because He knows that what is built on Him will not collapse when emotions fluctuate, and slowly you realize something powerful. This connection doesn't need to be rushed to be real. It can breathe, it can wait, it can grow without pressure, because what God is doing is not fragile. That kind of patience is not natural, it is taught, and it is a sign. Part 4. God shows you that purpose and calling are greater than romance alone. As the relationship continues to develop, God begins lifting your eyes higher. At first, the connection feels personal, deeply personal, but then something shifts. You begin to sense that this love is not just about companionship or happiness, it's about direction. God starts asking bigger questions through your heart. How does this relationship honor Him? How does it shape your obedience? How does it strengthen your calling instead of distracting from it? When you've met your soulmate, love no longer exists in isolation. It begins integrating into the larger story God is writing with your life. You start noticing that this relationship doesn't drain your purpose, it sharpens it. You become more intentional with your time, your habits, and your decisions. Not because you're afraid of losing the person, but because you respect what God is entrusting to you. God shows you that love is not the destination. It's the vehicle. Instead of being consumed by the relationship, you are strengthened by it. Your faith grows. Your discipline deepens. Your vision becomes clearer. You're not pulled away from what God has called you to do. You're supported in it. This is where many people realize the difference between a soulmate and an emotional attachment. Emotional attachment demands attention. Purpose-centered love offers support. One competes with calling. The other aligns with it. You begin to see how your gifts complement each other. Not perfectly, but purposefully. Where one of you lacks confidence, the other offers encouragement. Where one sees details, the other sees direction. God uses differences not to divide you, but to balance you. There is no competition, no fear of being overshadowed, no resentment toward growth. Instead, there is celebration. You genuinely want to see the other person become who God created them to be, even when that growth requires sacrifice or adjustment. God also teaches you that purpose requires maturity. There will be moments when comfort must bow to obedience, moments when your preferences must be surrendered for something greater. And because the relationship is aligned with God, these moments don't produce resentment, they produce agreement. You start thinking in terms of stewardship rather than satisfaction. How do we steward this love well? How do we protect it spiritually? How do we use it to serve, not just consume? Hospitality, generosity, prayer, service. These things begin flowing naturally, not as performance, but as overflow. You realize that God is not just preparing you for partnership, He is preparing you for responsibility. Responsibility for influence, responsibility for family, responsibility for witness. And this realization deepens your respect for the relationship. You stop treating it casually. You stop centering it around emotion alone. You begin honoring it as something God is actively shaping for His purposes. This is where love becomes covenant-minded, not in a legal sense, but in a spiritual one. You think long-term. You think generationally. You think about impact, not just intimacy. And when you realize that this connection doesn't shrink your world but expands it, doesn't distract you from God, but draws you closer, you begin to understand what God has been showing you all along. This isn't just romance. It sets alignment. It sets assignment. It sets purpose meeting love. And that is one of the strongest confirmations that what you're experiencing is not accidental. It is God-designed, God-timed, and God-led. Part 5. God shows you a deep, steady peace that is rooted in trust, not perfection. One of the most powerful and unmistakable things God shows you when you've met your soulmate is peace, but not the kind of peace the world talks about. Not the fragile peace that exists only when everything is going well. Not the shallow calm that disappears the moment uncertainty shows up. This is a deeper peace, a steady peace, a peace that settles into your spirit and stays there even when questions remain unanswered. This peace doesn't mean the relationship is easy. It means it is anchored. You may still face challenges. You may still encounter misunderstandings, differences in personality, moments of tension, or seasons that require patience, but something underneath it all feels different. You're not constantly anxious. You're not emotionally exhausted from overthinking. You're not afraid that one wrong word or difficult conversation will destroy everything. You are no longer living on edge. God shows you that this peace is not coming from the other person doing everything right. It's coming from Him being present in the relationship, and that distinction changes everything. Because when peace comes from God, it doesn't depend on perfection. It depends on trust. You begin to notice that your nervous system has settled. You're not in a constant state of emotional vigilance. You're not bracing for abandonment. You're not trying to read between every line or interpret silence as danger. You can be present. You can enjoy the connection without gripping it tightly. This peace allows you to be honest without fear. You can express concerns without worrying that honesty will push the other person away. You can admit weaknesses without feeling exposed. You can say, "This hurt me," or "I'm still growing," without feeling like you're risking the relationship. God shows you that healthy love is not threatened by truth. Instead of avoiding hard conversations, you're able to approach them calmly, not because they're comfortable, but because you trust that the relationship is strong enough to handle them. Conflict doesn't feel like a sign that something is wrong. It feels like an opportunity to grow together. This peace also changes how you handle uncertainty. You may not know exactly what the future holds. You may not have every timeline defined, but you're not panicking about it. You're not forcing clarity before it's time. You're willing to let things unfold under God's guidance. God shows you that peace is often His confirmation when words fall short. You also notice that this relationship doesn't distract you from God. It doesn't pull you away from prayer or dull your spiritual sensitivity. It doesn't make you justify compromise. Instead, it sharpens your discernment. You become more aware of God's presence, more attentive to His voice, and more committed to obedience. Your faith doesn't shrink in this relationship, it expands. You find yourself praying more intentionally, not just about the relationship, but about your own growth. You ask God to guard your heart, to lead your preventing decisions, to keep both of you aligned with His will. You're not idolizing the relationship, you're surrendering it. And that surrender produces peace. God also shows you that this peace frees you from emotional dependency. You're no longer looking to the relationship to complete you, save you, or define your worth. You're already grounded in God. The relationship becomes a partnership, not a lifeline. You still desire closeness. You still value connection, but you're not desperate for it. You're not afraid of losing yourself. You're not shrinking to be loved. You're showing up as who you are, secure, growing, and whole. This peace allows love to mature. It teaches you patience when things take time. It teaches you humility when you make mistakes. It teaches you forgiveness without denial. It teaches you endurance without bitterness. You begin to understand that love doesn't have to be loud to be real. It doesn't have to be dramatic to be meaningful. It doesn't have to be perfect to be protected by God. Peace becomes the emotional atmosphere of the relationship, not because everything is easy, but because trust is present, trust in each other, and more importantly, trust in God. And that peace guards you. It guards you from rushing ahead of wisdom. It guards you from repeating old patterns. It guards you from fear-driven decisions. It becomes a quiet, steady voice that says, "This is safe. This is being guided. You are not alone." That kind of peace cannot be manufactured. It cannot be forced, and it cannot be faked. It is shown by God when something is being built on the right foundation. Conclusion: when God brings a soulmate, He reveals a path, not just a person. Meeting your soulmate is never just about romance. It is never just about attraction, chemistry, or timing. When God brings a soulmate into your life, He reveals far more than a person. He reveals a process, a path, and a deeper understanding of love itself. God shows you yourself because healing must come before covenant. He shows you a higher definition of love because emotional attachment is not enough. He shows you patience because what lasts must be built carefully. He shows you purpose because love was never meant to stand alone. And He shows you peace because fear is never His confirmation. A soulmate connection from God does not replace Him. It reflects Him. It doesn't become the center of your life. It supports the center. It doesn't pull you away from obedience. It strengthens it. It doesn't demand perfection. It invites growth. If you look honestly at the connection and see that you are becoming more self-aware, more patient, more prayerful, more disciplined, more purposeful, and more peaceful, pay attention to that. God often confirms what is from Him not through dramatic signs, but through steady transformation. This kind of love doesn't rush you into decisions. It prepares you for covenant. It teaches you stewardship instead of consumption. It invites you to walk alongside someone, not ahead of God, not behind Him, but with Him at the center. And if you are still waiting, still discerning, Still praying, don't lose heart. God is not delaying love to punish you. He is preparing you to recognize it when it comes, preparing your heart to receive it wisely, preparing your vision so you don't confuse intensity with intention. Because when God brings two souls together, He is never careless, He is intentional, He is faithful, and He is always working for your good, even when you don't yet see the full picture. Love that comes from God does more than make you feel chosen. It makes you whole, it makes you wise, it makes you steady. And when you finally recognize that kind of love, you'll understand something deeply true. Meeting your soulmate was never just about finding the right person. It was about becoming the right steward of the love God entrusted to you.